Chosen one. This is about your father, and something subtle may be shifting for you right now, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in the quiet place where truth usually lands first. There are moments when nothing on the outside changes yet. Inside you, feel a recognition as if a long-standing question has finally found the right room to be asked in. You may not have come here by accident, but you don't have to force meaning onto that. Sometimes we're simply drawn toward reflections that match what's already stirring within us. If you've carried a sense of being different since childhood, or noticed patterns in your life that never fully explained themselves, this moment might feel familiar rather than surprising. For many, the relationship with a father, whether present, absent, gentle or complicated, leaves quiet impressions that echo through identity and purpose, not as wounds to relive, but as signals asking to be understood. What once felt confusing may begin to make sense when viewed through a wider lens. There's a passage that says, "Before you were formed in the womb, you were known not as a title, but as a reminder that identity often precedes explanation." You don't have to accept everything you hear here. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. This is not about conclusions, it's about awareness. And if something in you is listening more closely now, that may be enough to begin. Chosen one. As you settle into this moment, you may notice a quiet shift happening inside you, not the kind that rushes in with noise, but the kind that reveals itself slowly, like something familiar rising to the surface. For many anointed ones, the story of the Father is not a simple one. It is layered, filled with things said and unsaid, shaped by presence or absence, by gestures that didn't land, or by silence that lingered far too long. And yet, long before you had the words to describe any of it, your body and spirit were already interpreting the meaning behind those early impressions. Maybe you learned to observe instead of ask. Maybe you learned to anticipate instead of trust. Maybe you learned to carry more than a child should ever have been asked to carry. Even now as an adult, certain moments still awaken that tender place inside you, the one you had no choice but to protect. And if that feels true for you, let yourself feel seen for a moment, because that tenderness has a story, and so does the strength you built around it. Chosen one. Many of us grew up sensing more than we could explain. You might remember being a child and noticing things. Others seem to overlook the shift in someone's tone, the tension in a room, the subtle change in your father's presence, or the way he withheld parts of himself without ever acknowledging it. You may have felt responsible for maintaining peace or for shrinking your needs to avoid adding weight to the atmosphere. These are not small experiences. They shape the way a heart learns to love, to wait, to hope, and to endure. And while you may have moved through life with resilience, something inside you always knew that this part of your story held more influence than anyone around you ever realized. It was a quiet, shaping, an invisible thread running beneath the surface, touching everything you grew into. For some anointed ones, the Father was physically present but emotionally distant, a man who carried his own silent battles and unknowingly passed their weight to you. For others, the Father was absent entirely, a figure who existed more in imagination than memory. And for others still, the Father gave what he could, but love came filtered through his limitations, leaving you with questions you learned to silence. Whatever your version may be, there is often a moment in adulthood when the heart begins to recognize what it carried all along, not to blame, but to understand, not to reopen wounds, but to finally see the architecture of your identity with compassion rather than confusion. If you are feeling that recognition now, trust it. It is a sign that clarity is approaching, the kind that does not judge you for your past, but invites you to understand it. Chosen one. You may have noticed patterns in your life that trace back to this early bond. Perhaps you became the strong one, the reliable one, the one who rarely asks for help. Perhaps you learned to love people who remind you of your father's emotional distance, hoping that if you could make them see you, it would heal the part of you that once felt unseen. Or maybe you built walls so high and so impenetrable that even those who deeply care about you cannot easily reach the heart behind them. These patterns do not make you flawed. They make you human. They are responses to stories you did not choose but learned to survive. And survival, even when quiet, leaves a mark. Yet there is something else here, something many chosen souls eventually recognize. Despite the complexity of that early connection, you developed a depth that cannot be taught, a sensitivity that many overlook, an intuition sharpened by necessity. You learned to read between the lines because the lines themselves never told the whole truth. You learned to feel what wasn't spoken because silence was sometimes louder than words. You learned to find steadiness within yourself because the steadiness you needed wasn't always available outside of you. In many spiritual traditions, there is a belief that the soul is shaped not only by what it receives, but also by what it must learn to generate from within. You became your own shelter long before you realized that this too was a form of strength. My chosen one. There is a passage in Scripture that says in the book of Jeremiah chapter 1 verse 5 that before you were formed, you were known. This isn't a doctrine to accept, it's a reflection to sit with. It suggests that identity is older than circumstance, older than wounds, older even than the stories our families handed us. If something in you has always felt set apart, different, attuned, sensitive in ways others couldn't understand, that feeling may not have been a flaw, it may have been a sign. And even if your father could not see the fullness of who you were becoming, something greater did. Something that continued to accompany you quietly through every season of confusion, every moment of longing, every question that went unanswered. As you breathe here now, let this recognition settle gently. You do not have to force meaning onto anything. You do not have to diagnose your past or label your childhood. You are simply being invited to acknowledge the places your soul learned to stretch, to protect, to perceive, and to persevere. Those places were never signs of brokenness. They were the beginnings of wisdom. And as you continue listening, you may start to notice how that wisdom has been shaping your life all along. Chosen one. As you move deeper into this reflection, you may notice memories surfacing, not always as clear images, but as sensations, impressions, or quiet realizations that have followed you for years. The relationship between a father and a child leaves imprints that often remain unspoken. You might remember moments when you longed for reassurance, times when you wished he would look at you with recognition instead of distance, or days when his silence felt heavier than any words. And even if you cannot name the exact moment when that longing began, you likely felt its weight in the way you learned to navigate the world. Many anointed ones grow up carrying an emotional map that was shaped more by what was missing than by what was present. This isn't something to judge yourself for. It is simply the truth of how your heart learned to form itself in the absence of certain kinds of safety. There is a quiet complexity in this kind of upbringing. You may have grown skilled at being strong, even when you were tired at staying composed, even when you were overwhelmed at being understanding, even when you were the one who needed understanding the most. These traits can look like maturity from the outside, but on the inside they often grow from carrying responsibilities your younger self never should have been asked to hold. If you felt like you had to manage other people's emotions, read your environment before stepping into it, or silence your needs to keep peace, those behaviors didn't come from nowhere. They were survival instincts shaped by years of trying to interpret the emotional landscape around your father. And just because you learned those instincts early does not mean they define you forever. Awareness loosens what once felt fixed. Chosen one. If your father was present in body but distant in heart, that distance often teaches a child to internalize confusion. You might have wondered what you did wrong, even when the truth had nothing to do with you at all. You may have tried to earn affection, thinking that if you were good enough, quiet enough, accomplished enough, he would finally notice the parts of you that longed to be seen. These silent negotiations shape the inner world of a child in ways that linger into adulthood. Without realizing it, you may still seek people who mirror that emotional rhythm, people who give you just enough connection to keep you hopeful, but not enough to make you feel fully safe. This pattern doesn't mean you are broken, it means you adapted. And adaptation is a form of intelligence, not failure. For others, the father was physically absent. In that case, the longing becomes more like a question than a memory. You might have looked at other families wondering what it felt like to be protected, guided, or validated by a father's steady presence. You may have imagined conversations that never happened, or milestones he never saw, and that imagination shaped your emotional reality as much as actual events would have. Absence is not emptiness, it's a kind of presence that creates its own shadows. And often those shadows follow a child into adulthood, showing up in the fear of being abandoned, the need to prove your worth, or the instinct to hold people at arm's length, even when you crave closeness. For some anointed ones, the father offered love, but a love distorted by his own wounds, shaped by what he didn't know how to give. Perhaps he tried, but didn't know how to express affection. Perhaps he cared, but could not communicate it. Perhaps he loved you deeply, but was confined by a lifetime of emotional restriction. If this was your experience, you may carry a strange mix of appreciation and ache, gratitude and sadness. These are not contradictions, they are the natural result of loving someone whose heart was partially closed to you. And if you ever felt guilty for wanting more, know this: wanting emotional connection is not a burden. It is a birthright. Chosen one. As you listen, you may begin to notice how these early patterns shaped your ability to trust. Maybe you learned to be hyper-independent because depending on someone never felt safe. Maybe you built emotional walls so sturdy that even those who love you struggle to enter. Or maybe you became a giver, someone who pours into others, hoping that the love you offer will circle back to fill the emptiness you carried. These coping strategies were not defects. They were forms of protection your younger self crafted with the tools available at the time. And the fact that you survived with your heart still capable of love is a quiet miracle of its own. But here is the part many chosen souls don't realize: the absence or inconsistency of a father often awakens spiritual sensitivity. You may have learned to listen inwardly because outward guidance wasn't reliable. You may have noticed signs, synchronicities, recurring dreams, or moments of intuition because your inner world became your compass long before you understood why. Many anointed ones describe a sense of unseen protection during times when they should have felt alone, or moments when a calm voice within them whispered the truth they couldn't quite articulate. These experiences are not coincidences. They are the ways your spirit stayed connected, even when human connection was limited. There is a passage in Scripture in the book of Psalm 139, verse 14, that speaks of being fearfully and wonderfully made, not as a claim to cling to, but as a gentle reminder that your design includes depths your Father's presence or absence could never erase. Your worth did not enter the world through him. It entered through the simple fact that you exist, and that existence has been protected in ways you may only now be beginning to understand. Chosen one. As these reflections settle, notice what is stirring in you. You don't need to force clarity or rush healing. You are simply becoming aware of the architecture of your own heart, the unseen places where pain became wisdom, where longing became intuition, and where silence became strength. And awareness, gentle as it is already reshaping the story you once thought you had to carry alone. Chosen one. As you continue on this inner path, you may feel something softening, not in a way that weakens you, but in a way that lets you see the truths you once had to ignore in order to survive. Sometimes healing begins not with answers, but with the simple permission to acknowledge what your younger self endured. You learned early on to hold so much together. You learned to navigate emotional terrain that was uneven, unpredictable, or completely unmarked. Even now, pieces of you may still react from instinct, from vigilance, from the echoes of experiences you couldn't fully process at the time. And none of this makes you flawed. It makes you someone who had to grow wisdom in places where guidance should have been given. As the layers unfold, it becomes clearer that what you lived through shaped much more than your memories. It shaped your posture in relationships, the way you enter a room, the way you trust, the way you protect yourself, and even the way you hope. Many anointed ones find themselves loving with a quiet caution, holding their hearts back until they feel completely safe, or giving deeply, but receiving very little in return. These patterns, though painful at times, come from a root. You rarely examine the part of you that learned to survive emotionally without consistent reassurance. When a child grows accustomed to unpredictability, they grow into an adult who anticipates pain before it arrives, who reads every expression, who notices small shifts that others overlook. It's a form of intuition shaped by necessity, not luxury. If your father was emotionally inconsistent, distant, or harsh, that inconsistency can leave a lasting imprint. You may have learned to prepare for disappointment long before it showed up. You may have learned to silence your needs because expressing them didn't change anything. You may have learned that being strong was safer than being vulnerable. And these habits follow you not because you choose them, but because they once protected you. And even though you have grown beyond those early days, remnants of those responses still live within you, surfacing at unexpected times, moments when love feels risky, when closeness feels confusing, or when commitment feels like a potential wound waiting to open. But there is also another truth emerging: you did not walk through those years without gaining something valuable. Even in the absence of emotional guidance, you developed an inner compass, one that sensed truth before it was spoken, one that recognized danger before it was visible, one that felt tenderness even when it was hidden beneath someone else's silence. This sensitivity was not a curse. It was an inheritance. It helped you navigate life with perception, wisdom, and an almost spiritual awareness that many people spend years trying to cultivate. What for others comes through teaching you, learned through lived experience. Chosen one. If you ever felt that you were guiding yourself through life without a map, know that your intuition stepped in where leadership was missing. You learned to hear your inner voice because the outer voices were unclear or unreliable. You learn to discern the emotional truth of a situation because you were trained by necessity to detect the slightest shifts. That level of attunement is not accidental. It is the quiet mark of someone who has always been spiritually receptive, even before they understood what that meant. And though it may have come from hardship, it grew you into someone whose insight is rare, whose empathy is deep, and whose awareness is profound. For many anointed ones, spiritual signs began appearing early moments of inexplicable knowing dreams that carried messages or sensations of being protected, even when protection should not have been possible. You might remember times when you sensed danger before it unfolded, or moments when you felt an unseen presence comforting you during your most vulnerable seasons. These experiences are often dismissed or overlooked, especially by those who weren't raised in environments that acknowledged the unseen, but your soul recognized them, and it continues to recognize them still. There is a quiet beauty in realizing that even when your earthly father couldn't provide certain forms of safety or guidance, something greater stepped in, not to replace him, but to support you in the places where absence echoed most loudly. This does not diminish the hurt you felt. It simply acknowledges that your story includes threads woven by something beyond human limitation. There is a verse in the book of 1 Peter chapter 2 verse 9 that describes being called out, set apart, in a way that is both intimate and intentional, not as a title, but as a reminder that some souls carry a different kind of path, one that leads through shadow into clarity, through longing into understanding. As these truths settle, you might begin noticing how your father's presence or absence shaped not only the vulnerabilities you carry, but the strengths you've cultivated. The tenderness in you was born from feeling what others could not. The depth in you was shaped by navigating emotional spaces that demanded wisdom long before your time. The courage in you grew from learning to stand without the support you deserved. None of this is meant to romanticize pain, but to acknowledge the resilience, intuition, and spiritual sensitivity that rose from it. Chosen. One awareness doesn't erase the past, but it does illuminate it. And as you see your story with clearer eyes, you may also begin to feel a subtle shift, an understanding that the emotional patterns you once saw as burdens were actually preparing you for a different kind of becoming. Not all stories start with ease. Some begin in silence, so the soul can learn to speak. Some begin in longing, so the heart can learn to love deeply. Some begin in confusion, so clarity can one day feel like revelation. And your story, complex, tender, and resilient as it is beginning to reveal its deeper meaning now. Chosen one. As you continue allowing these reflections to move through you, something deeper may be awakening and understanding that your story with your father is not just about what happened or didn't happen, but about how those early experiences shaped the way your soul learned to grow. Many anointed ones carry an inner narrative that formed long before they had the language to articulate it. You might have absorbed the belief that you had to earn affection, or that expressing your needs made you a burden, or that love was something that had to be measured, not trusted. These beliefs often settle quietly into the background, influencing your relationships, your self-worth, and even the way you interpret your own emotions. And though these beliefs were shaped by circumstance, they were never a reflection of your true identity. There is something profoundly human about wanting your father to see you, to understand you, to recognize your softness and your strength. When that recognition is absent or limited, the heart often fills the silence with questions. What did I do wrong? Why wasn't I enough? What was missing in me that he couldn't reach for me? These questions do not come from weakness, they come from longing, from a child's hope that love could have looked different, and from the adult's quiet ache that still remembers what was never received. But as tender as those questions are, they do not hold the truth. They were shaped by a moment in time, not by the fullness of who you are. Chosen one, as you step into greater clarity, you may begin to understand that your father's limitations were reflections of his own story, not of your worth. His silence may have come from wounds he never healed. His distance may have come from fears he never named. His absence, whether emotional or physical, may have come from burdens he never found the strength to confront. Understanding this is not the same as excusing it, but it does help free your heart from carrying the blame that never belonged to you. And the moment you begin seeing his humanity not as justification but as context, something softens inside you. Not a forgiveness forced through willpower, but an unbinding, a release of the belief that any part of your worth was determined by what he could not give. This unbinding creates space for something else to grow, the realization that you have been cultivating strength, empathy, and spiritual depth in the very places where you once felt most alone. The tenderness that others admire in you, the wisdom that you offer instinctively, the quiet sensitivity that attunes you to the emotional realities around you. All of these qualities emerged from your willingness to feel deeply even when feeling was painful. These traits are the result of surviving without shutting down, of navigating your emotional world with a courage you may not have realized you were exercising. And these qualities, though born from difficulty, have become some of the most beautiful parts of you. There is also a phenomenon that many chosen souls eventually recognize. The more complicated the relationship with their father, the more they tend to seek a higher understanding of themselves. Pain often becomes a doorway to spiritual sensitivity. Longing often becomes a doorway to inner wisdom. The absence of affirmation often becomes a doorway to discovering a deeper source of identity, one that does not rely on human approval, but emerges from a quiet, inner knowing. This is not about elevating suffering. It is about acknowledging that the places where you fractured are the very places where your light found a way to rise. Chosen one, you may also begin to notice how your journey has been preparing you to break generational patterns. Whether you realize it or not, you have already started disrupting cycles of silence, emotional distance, or unresolved wounds. The simple act of becoming aware, of refusing to repeat what harmed you, is profound. It is the beginning of a legacy built not from pain, but from intention. You are learning to communicate what you feel. You are learning to choose presence over avoidance. You are learning to offer the kinds of love, safety, and tenderness you once longed for. These shifts may seem subtle, but they signal a transformation unfolding within you, one that shapes not only your present, but also the future of everyone connected to your life. As this understanding deepens, you may begin to feel a sense of inner alignment, not the dramatic kind, but a slow, steady recognition that you are becoming someone who is no longer defined by the gaps of your past. You are becoming someone who chooses differently, loves differently, and sees differently. And though the journey has been long and the ache was real, you are emerging with a clarity that few ever find. Awareness does not erase what happened, but it does allow you to reclaim the parts of yourself that were shaped by survival instead of truth. And reclaiming yourself, chosen one, is the quiet beginning of becoming whole. Chosen one. As this journey continues to unfold within you, there is something important gently rising to the surface, an understanding that healing does not always arrive the way we imagine it will. Sometimes it comes not through reconciliation, but through recognition. Sometimes it comes not from receiving what was missing, but from realizing that the absence itself shaped you into someone capable of extraordinary depth. And while the longing for what you never received may still echo at times, you are beginning to see that the echo is not a wound anymore. It is a reminder of how far you've come and how much wiser and stronger you have grown because of what you survived. As you let this truth settle, you may also begin to notice how your life has been marked by moments of unexpected clarity. Times when you looked back on something painful and realized it was shaping you in ways you couldn't see back then. Times when you found yourself acting with compassion in situations where others would have shut down. Times when your heart recognized someone else's pain before they spoke a word. These are not coincidences. They are signs that your soul refused to harden, even when the world gave you every reason to close yourself off. And that softness, steady, resilient, unwavering, is not weakness. It is one of the purest forms of strength you carry. Chosen one. There is a kind of wisdom that grows only in people who have felt deeply. You learned to listen beneath the surface because the surface rarely told you the truth. You learned to watch for emotional patterns because words were not always consistent with actions. You learned to sense the energy of a moment because you could not rely on the stability of the person who should have protected you most. And while these skills came from difficult places, they have become a compass that guides you with precision. You intuitively understand things others struggle to grasp. You notice the unspoken. You recognize the subtle. You feel the shifts in atmosphere long before anyone else detects them. These abilities once helped you survive, but now they are helping you become. There is also something else that emerges from the complexity of the Father, wound a deep desire to create safety where you once felt none. Perhaps you notice it in the way you show up for others with steady presence, or in the way you listen without judgment, or in the way you offer reassurance even when you yourself are in need of it. You may not realize it, but every time you choose gentleness over distance, every time you choose honesty over avoidance, every time you choose to stay emotionally present, even when it feels vulnerable, you are breaking a cycle that was passed down to you. You are refusing to repeat what once caused you pain. And that decision made in quiet moments without ceremony or recognition is one of the most powerful acts of healing any soul can undertake. As you walk this path, you may also begin to feel the weight of expectations slowly dissolving. For so long you may have believed that your worth was tied to how well you performed, how much you achieved, or how perfectly you behaved. These beliefs often form in environments where affirmation was conditional or inconsistent. But now, as you reflect on your journey, you may begin to see that your value was never something you had to earn. It was always inherent. It was always present. It was always yours, and recognizing this truth marks a turning point, the moment when you begin moving through life not as someone trying to prove something, but as someone reclaiming what was always within you. Chosen. One another truth becomes visible as well. The absence or limitation of your Father did not diminish your capacity to love. If anything, it expanded it. You learned through contrast what love should feel like. You learned through longing what connection should look like. You learned through disappointment what presence truly means. And now when you offer love, you offer it with intention. When you show up for others, you do so wholeheartedly. When you build relationships, you build them with honesty and depth. These qualities are not accidental. They are the result of years spent understanding what it feels like when those qualities are missing. And as these realizations intertwine within you, something shifts quietly but unmistakably. You stop defining yourself by what you didn't receive and begin defining yourself by what you are now capable of giving, creating, and becoming. This is not the end of your healing, but it is the moment when your story begins to move in a new direction. A direction shaped not by pain, but by awareness, not by longing, but by clarity, not by the wounds of your past, but by the strength rising within you now. Chosen one. As you continue walking through these inner landscapes, you may feel something beginning to rearrange itself inside you, not in a dramatic rush, but in a slow, grounding way that finally lets you breathe differently. Healing from the father wound often unfolds like this, not as a single breakthrough, but as a series of gentle recognitions that gather strength over time. And one of the most profound recognitions is this: you are no longer the child who had to make sense of someone else's silence. You are no longer the one waiting at the edge of someone's emotional doorway, hoping they would finally open it. You are not standing in that old place anymore. Even if echoes of it still surface, you are seeing them now from a different vantage point, one aligned with adulthood awareness and the expanding clarity of your own becoming. There is a certain point in your journey where you begin to understand that not all absences were personal. Not all distances were punishments. Some people simply did not know how to give what they themselves never received. Some men learned strength without softness, discipline without tenderness, responsibility without emotional presence. And while that does not erase the impact their limitations had on you, it does allow you to see the situation through a broader lens. You begin to understand that your father's shortcomings were not indicators of your unworthiness. They were reflections of his own unhealed history. And when that truth finally settles even subtly, the weight you've carried begins to redistribute itself. The pain becomes less about you and more about the broken lineage you were born into and now are learning to rise beyond. Chosen. 1. One of the most sacred parts of this process is realizing that your healing is rewriting more than just your own narrative. It is interrupting generational patterns of emotional withholding, patterns of neglect, patterns of silence, patterns of unresolved hurt passed down like invisible inheritance. Whether you realize it or not, your willingness to look inward, to tell the truth about your experience, to soften without collapsing, to feel without drowning, these are the actions that shift entire bloodlines. Many anointed ones are born into families where emotional awareness was missing precisely because they were meant to evolve it. Your sensitivity, your depth, your introspection, these qualities are not accidental. They are part of your assignment, not as a burden, but as a path toward liberation. And there is something else awakening as you reflect the emergence of your inner protector. For so long, you may have expected others to safeguard your heart, to offer you the guidance or reassurance you deserved but didn't receive. But now, slowly, you are becoming the one who steps in for yourself. You are learning to recognize your needs without shame. You are learning to set boundaries not from fear, but from clarity. You are learning to rest when you're tired, to speak when something matters, to withdraw when an environment is unsafe, not because you're avoiding, but because you're listening to the wisdom your spirit has been cultivating for years. This is the beginning of emotional sovereignty, the moment when you stop outsourcing your sense of safety to people who were never capable of providing it. Chosen one. There is a quiet shift that happens when you realize you are no longer looking for your father in other people. For years, you may have unconsciously gravitated toward relationships that mirrored his energy, emotionally unavailable partners, distant mentors, friends who required you to overextend yourself just to maintain connection. These patterns were the mind's attempt to resolve an old story through new characters. But now, as awareness deepens, you may notice that you are less pulled toward those familiar dynamics. You are beginning to crave consistency instead of intensity, presence instead of promises, honesty instead of emotional guessing games. This shift signals something powerful. You are healing the part of you that once believed love had to feel complicated. As this clarity expands, you may also begin to recognize the quiet ways you have always been supported, even when human support was lacking. Perhaps it showed up as intuition, nudging you away from danger. Perhaps it appeared in unexpected protection during seasons of vulnerability. Perhaps it whispered to you in moments when you felt alone, but somehow sensed you weren't completely abandoned. Whether you interpret these moments spiritually or emotionally, their presence is undeniable. They remind you that your story has never been guided by randomness alone. There has always been a thread leading you toward understanding, growth and alignment, sometimes gently, sometimes urgently, but always with purpose. There is a scripture written in the book of Isaiah, chapter 43, verse 1, that speaks of being called by name. Not called as in summoned, but called as in known, recognized, acknowledged, affirmed. This reflection is not about forcing belief. It is about offering a mirror. The kind of mirror that reminds you that your identity is larger than the wounds you inherited, larger than the story you were born into, larger than the emotional landscape of your father's limitations. You were known before those wounds took shape. You were whole before those narratives were written. And now, as you step further into your awareness, you are beginning to remember the parts of yourself that were never lost, only waiting to be reclaimed. Chosen one. As you continue moving through these deeper layers, something within you may be settling into a new kind of understanding, one that doesn't rush, doesn't force clarity, but unfolds with the gentleness of someone finally returning to themselves. Healing, especially healing connected to the father wound, is rarely a straight path. It bends, circles, pauses, and picks up again in unexpected places. And yet, despite its unpredictability, there is a rhythm to it, a quiet intelligence within your spirit that knows exactly when you're ready to see another piece of truth. Right now, you may be stepping into another one of those moments where what once felt heavy now begins to feel meaningful, and what once felt confusing begins to take a clearer shape. There is something profoundly liberating in realizing that you no longer need your father's apology, acknowledgement, or transformation to continue your journey. For a long time, it may have felt like everything depended on a moment that never came, the conversation where he would finally explain himself, the embrace that would make everything make sense, the recognition you deserved but didn't receive. These imagined moments often become emotional anchors, keeping your heart tied to a version of healing that depends on someone else's readiness. But now, slowly, you are loosening that anchor. You are beginning to see that closure is not something given, it is something created from within. And there is power in that realization, quiet but undeniable. Chosen one. The truth is that much of your growth has happened in the solitude your father left behind. In that space, you learn to understand yourself without external validation. You learn to speak the language of your own emotions. You learn to offer yourself comfort when it wasn't offered to you. And while no child should have had to do that alone, the adult you are becoming now carries the strength of every moment you survived. This strength is not loud. It is not the kind others need to see. It is the kind that sits quietly in your bones, guiding you, grounding you, reminding you that you have walked through things many people never saw, and you did not lose your softness in the process. As this awareness grows, you may start to recognize something else. The inner child within you is no longer abandoned. They are no longer waiting by the window of your memories, hoping for someone who couldn't show up for them. You are there now. You are the one listening to their fears, tending to their wounds, and offering the reassurance they once desperately needed. This is one of the most sacred parts of healing, the moment when you become the protector you always wished for, the voice of compassion you rarely heard, the source of stability you longed to feel. When this shift happens, the echoes of old wounds begin to soften. The fear of rejection diminishes. The impulse to prove yourself weakens, because the part of you that once felt alone finally understands that someone is here, present and attentive, and that someone is you. Chosen. 1. Another transformation is unfolding too. Your understanding of love is changing. When a father is absent, inconsistent, or emotionally unreachable, it teaches a child a distorted version of love, one that feels like longing, earning, guessing, or waiting. But as you heal, you may begin to crave a different kind of love, one that is stable, mutual, and nourishing. You may notice yourself setting boundaries you never had before, choosing relationships that value your presence, and walking away from dynamics that drain your spirit. These shifts are not signs of harshness, they are signs of awakening. They show that your heart is beginning to trust itself enough to choose what feels aligned rather than what feels familiar. You might also begin to recognize how deeply the universe or the divine or your own inner wisdom has been supporting your healing. Perhaps you've noticed patterns that seem too aligned to be accidents, moments of guidance that arrived exactly when you needed them, or inner nudges that protected you from repeating old hurt. These experiences do not need to be labeled or explained, but their presence is real. They remind you that you have never been navigating this journey alone. Even in your loneliest seasons, something in the unseen has been walking beside you, keeping watch over your evolution. There is a scripture in the book of Psalm 27, verse 10 that says, "Even if father and mother forsake you, the divine will receive you." This is not a statement meant to impose belief, but a reflection of something many anointed ones discover through lived experience, that love, guidance, and protection can come from sources far beyond our biological relationships, that we can be held by something larger, wiser, and more consistent than the limitations of our earthly families. As these realizations continue taking root, you may feel a growing sense of inner spaciousness, as if the room once occupied by pain is now slowly being filled with understanding, gentleness, and truth. This is the quiet work of healing. It does not erase the past, but it releases the past from defining you. And as this release deepens, you may find yourself stepping into a version of yourself who is no longer shaped by longing, but by clarity. No longer driven by survival, but by intention. No longer held back by the shadows of what you didn't receive, but strengthened by the wisdom rising from within. Chosen one. As you arrive at this next depth of your journey, you may begin to sense that something inside you is no longer fighting to stay hidden. The parts of yourself that once survived by shrinking, by staying quiet, by adapting to the emotional climate around you, they are slowly beginning to unfold. This unfolding is not dramatic. It is not loud. It feels more like a soft exhale after years of holding your breath. There is a quiet truth emerging within you. You have outgrown the story that was written for you by someone else's wounds. And now, with each step of awareness, you are beginning to choose your own narrative. One of the most powerful realizations in the healing of a father wound is understanding that you are not defined by the love you didn't receive. For a long time, the absence or inconsistency in your father's presence may have shaped how you saw yourself. You may have believed you were hard to love, unworthy of attention, or responsible for someone else's inability to show up. These beliefs don't disappear quickly. They dissolve slowly as you begin to see the truth more clearly. And the truth is this: you were always worthy. You were always deserving. You were always enough. His limitations were never a reflection of your value, only of his own unhealed story. As this truth roots deeper within you, another shift begins. You start reclaiming parts of yourself you once abandoned. Maybe you silenced your voice because it didn't feel safe to speak. Maybe you dimmed your light because being seen felt threatening. Maybe you withheld your dreams because you learned early on that vulnerability was met with indifference. But now, chosen one, those parts of you are stirring again. They are rising not with desperation, but with clarity. You're beginning to understand that your voice deserves to be heard, your presence deserves to take up space, and your dreams deserve to be pursued without apology. It is in this phase of healing that many anointed ones begin to notice how their relationships shift. You may find yourself less willing to tolerate emotional inconsistency or half-hearted effort. You may discover a newfound ability to walk away from situations that exhaust you. You may feel a deeper pull toward people who see you, hear you, and meet you without requiring you to shrink. This is not you becoming cold. This is you honoring your spirit. This is you refusing to reenact the old pattern of chasing someone who cannot give what you need. It is a sign that your heart is learning to choose alignment over attachment. Another profound emergence happens here too, the recognition that forgiveness is not the same as reconciliation. Forgiveness in this context is the release of the belief that you needed anything more from your father to become who you are meant to be. It is the soft acknowledgement that you no longer need to replay old scenarios in your mind, imagining different outcomes. Those outcomes are no longer required for your peace. You have grown beyond them. And while reconciliation may or may not ever occur, the inner restoration happening inside you is already enough to shift everything. Chosen one. As this restoration expands, something else becomes beautifully clear. You are beginning to feel the presence of your own inner strength in ways you couldn't before. Not the kind of strength that comes from endurance alone, but the kind that comes from wholeness, from knowing yourself deeply, from recognizing your patterns, from choosing your boundaries, from honoring your needs. This strength does not need to prove anything. It does not need to shout. It simply stands. It simply exists. It simply knows. And in this knowing, you may start to see the ways your story has always been guiding you toward transformation. The pain you endured taught you empathy. The silence you survived taught you awareness. The longing you carried taught you depth. And the healing you are embracing now is teaching you freedom, the freedom to exist without the weight of old narratives, the freedom to love without fear, the freedom to build a life not shaped by survival, but by intention. There is a passage in the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 16, that says, "The Spirit bears witness with our spirit that we are held, guided, and known." Whether you interpret this spiritually, emotionally, or symbolically, the essence remains something within you recognizes truth as soon as it touches your soul. And right now, that recognition is unfolding. It is telling you that the story of your father, however painful, however complicated, is not the end of your story. It is a chapter, but not the conclusion. Chosen one. As this chapter settles, let yourself feel what is rising, the calm, the clarity, the groundedness, the sense that you are no longer walking through life defined by what was missing. You are walking as someone who has reclaimed their narrative, reconnected with their spirit, and remembered their worth. And this remembering, quiet as it is, marks the beginning of a different kind of life, one shaped by truth, shaped by awareness, shaped by the strength that has always been yours. Chosen one. As we close this moment together, let your spirit stay soft for just a little longer. You've been walking through memories, meanings, and quiet awakenings that have lived inside you for years. What you're feeling now isn't noise or confusion, it's recognition. A gentle knowing rising from a deeper place, reminding you that the shift unfolding within you is real, even if it moves in silence. You are beginning to see yourself with clearer eyes, not as the child who carried unanswered questions, but as the anointed one who is learning to stand in truth, strength, and tenderness at the same time. This is sacred work. This is the kind of healing that doesn't shout, but reshapes everything. And even if you can't name it yet, your spirit knows something is aligning, something is settling, something is opening that was once closed. Chosen one, you do not walk forward from this video as someone lacking anything. You walk forward as someone becoming whole. The patterns you're recognizing are not punishments, they are signposts, they are invitations from your own soul, guiding you toward greater clarity, healthier connections, and a deeper understanding of who you truly are beneath the echoes of your past. If you've been sensing a quiet shift beginning, trust that awareness. Trust the timing, trust the unfolding, trust the way your heart is beginning to choose itself without guilt. Your story is widening now, and with every step you are learning to carry your history with grace instead of heaviness. So as you leave this space, I speak this blessing over you. May clarity meet you gently. May strength rise in you naturally. May peace settle into the places that once felt uncertain. And may you walk forward with discernment, grounded in the truth that you are more aligned, more aware, and more guided than you have ever been. If this message touched something true in you, let your spirit acknowledge it. Comment 777, or I receive as a small act of recognition, not obligation, but resonance. And if you feel led, let your like or share be a quiet agreement with the path you're stepping into. Chosen one, you've done sacred work today. Go forward, steady, rooted, and awake. Your shift has already begun.